The Beatles!
Hi, everybody. This is John here. This is Paul, George,
and Ringo.
And we're very happy to be on your program once again.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Beatles News Briefs. I'm your host, Steve Marinucci, and on today's show, we have an interview with Journey Boyd, who is the sister of Pattie Boyd, and therefore was the sister-in-law of George Harrison, and she was also the former wife of drummer Mick Fleetwood of Fleetwood Mac. She's written a couple of books, an earlier one called It's Not Only Rock and Roll, where she talked to 75 of the world's musicians, including Clapton and Don Henley and Joni Mitchell and Ravi Shankar and George Harrison. Her new book, Juniper, A Journey Beyond the Muse, talks about her life, and that's what we'll be discussing in this interview, which was really delightful to do. And if you've heard Pattie Boyd's voice, you'll notice, probably not surprisingly, that she sounds a lot like her. Anyway, here's my interview with Journey Boyd. Stick around at the end and we'll have a little more to say. There's so much that happens in the book. It documents so much, and it's a very honest book, and a lot of it is very introspective. Why did you do it?
Well, it's interesting because it actually started probably when I'd left LA, came to England, and I was working for this treatment center. But meanwhile, I just finished a second marriage, and I was had a couple of years before, and then I was also married to my third marriage, and I started jotting things down, memories of things, trying to make sense of my life, basically, and then that grew and grew, and more memories came from Africa and things that happened, and sort of certain things that happened in the book, things that I never really forgave myself for, or, unfinished business. And so the more I kept writing about it, writing, the more I just released it. And so I think it was pretty therapeutic to begin with. And then I was having to do this in spare time. But then I decided, actually, am I brave enough to actually put all this stuff out there? And so I turned it into a very thinly disguised fiction. And so I was working on that for a few years. And then things had happened, and I'd found my father and different relations. And so then I started turning it into more of a psychological book of the effects an absent father has on the daughter, and the kind of men she will then choose in her life as she gets older. And after that, a few years later on that one, and then I came to a straight memoir. And so this memoir, the book that you've read, is one that bits of memories have been taken out, little bits added in, enlarged some bits, released others, and now I'm happy with how it is. And so it's been, although it's called Juniper, A Journey Beyond the Muse, this book has had its own journey, actually. And I'm very pleased with it as it is now.
Yeah, it definitely seems that way. And that was the impression that I got in going through it. It had, twists and turns to it. It had me wondering actually at a couple of points, where it was going. But then I saw, as you got into the later stages of the book, you see where it's going, and it's very emotional, and it's a very personal book, probably a little more personal than other books of its type. Is it fair to say that the relationship with Mick was not the center of the book? I'm talking about, for people who don't know, Mick Fleetwood. Is that the center of the book, or no?
No, it's not the center of the book, but it's a big part of it because, you have the innocence of the 60s, and that includes the whole swinging 60s, San Francisco and India. And then the next stage really is the sort of decadence of the 70s, how it became.
Right.
And that was really hard. And I think I learned a lot of lessons in that part. It was really painful. It was, searching for myself, and it went pretty dark. And then coming out the other side. So it plays a huge part in as much as part of the journey that, all good journeys have a really a place where one's very lost, and then you re-find yourself.
Right.
And so it's that sort of dark, deep stuff that it goes into, and it's all to do with, as well as just my relationship with Mick, but that was just a reflection of, how I was getting through it myself, or trying to get through it, or my very lostness in it.
How do you and Pattie differ? How are you and Pattie different?
Okay, we have had a lot of similar experiences. Like, we were both models, even though I never planned to be a model, but she knew she was going to be a model. I never planned to be a model, and it just so happened, like a little leaf in the wind, I kind of fell into it and had these very nice fashion designers, and I became a house model for them, and that was my introduction to it. And then more and more of the editors of the glossy magazine said, well, she should be a photographic model. So I kind of fell into it. So we were both models. We both married musicians. We both had our second marriage as musicians. And it was just this odd thing that we did. We were very sort of psychically linked, I think. And then as the years went by, we then started taking our own paths. And I think it's probably a natural progression. And I think I'm much more psychological in my way of thinking and, my training. And I think she's quite different. I love to write, whereas she's much more visual than I am. And photography is her love.
Okay. What did you think of George Harrison when you first met him?
I thought he was lovely. I thought he was, as I say, I thought he was really small, much smaller than I imagined he would be. But then that's the larger than life, these kind of people become when you see them in the newspapers and on television and everything. And I thought he was very gentle and very generous with himself, and a real family man.
And you knew him. You kept in touch with him all the way, probably till he died, correct? Is that
pretty much to before that? Yeah, just before that. Whether I was living in LA, I'd sometimes see him in LA, or he'd send a fax. So he was the sort of person, and I think I said in the book, there's so much bits will be taken out, and I can't remember which bits are still in, that I was always really pleased that he was in the world. Just knowing he was in the world. He was just a very special person to me. And we had a very sort of spiritual link, I think.
Early in the book, you talk about your encounters not only with Mick Fleetwood, but with a lot of other musicians, Peter Green, Rod Stewart, Van Morrison, Eric Clapton. And this is a lot in the days before they were famous. I mean, did you have any inkling that these guys would go on to bigger and better things? I'm talking like especially about Peter Green and Rod Stewart and Mick. I mean, did you think that they were going to be as big as they were?
No way. No, it was very much in the moment, because one's young then too. And it's just, like with Mick, when he was in the band The Shames, the first band I knew him in, which was Notting Hill Gate Band, it was just, that's what it was, they did rhythm and blues, and they did great music, but I didn't think of things like, what would it be like 5 years from now or 10 years from now? It was just great listening to live music, and that's what it was about. And the thing is, I loved music. And the thing that my two other sisters and I had in common, we all loved music and we all loved to dance.
How did you tell a great story in the book of how you inspired George Harrison to write Within You, Without You? Would you recount that for me, please? Yes.
I had, after during my modeling days, I remember I had what I call nowadays, it was a sort of spiritual awakening, really, or an aha moment, when I suddenly see everything as cyclical, like birth, death, rebirth, and very much more in tune with the Eastern philosophies. And then George and Pattie, sort of sometime afterwards, they said they'd felt the same thing. So then it put me on a search. I was searching for something because it had had such a profound effect on me. And I wanted to find other people who'd had a similar feeling. There was something about, it was a sort of spiritual search, awakening.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember there was this one guy just off the King's Road in London, in Chelsea, and a few of us used to congregate there. We'd smoke pot and just listen to great music, just the music of that time, Dylan, whatever, Beatles, whatever. And then there would always be some books on his table. One day I was just looking through one of his books called Karma and Rebirth by Christmas Humphreys. And nobody was talking and just listening. And then I saw this line, life goes on you, within you and without you. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. There's a sort of double meaning in there. And so I read it a few times. And then I called Pattie and George answered the phone. And I just said, listen to this. Life goes on you, within you and without you. And then that obviously what inspired the song from that.
Mm-hmm. You were in India with the Beatles when they did the whole thing with the Maharishi. What did you think of transcendental meditation, first of all? Did you like that, and are you still practicing?
Okay, so we all first got initiated when we went to Bangor in Wales. Mm-hmm. and we stayed there for a few days, and that's the unfortunate time when their manager, Brian Epstein, died. Mm-hmm. But we'd all got initiated, we'd all started meditating, and then that's when George asked, would I like to go to India? And obviously he discussed it with Pattie beforehand, and it was a dream come true. But the thing is, it wasn't going to be for another 2-3 months. So during that time, I was doing the transcendental meditation in the morning and in the afternoon, and it felt great. I really liked it because I'd felt quite lost after I came back from San Francisco in many ways. And so by the time I got to India, I was well into TM meditations, but I never really could feel a real connection with Maharishi. Mm-hmm. And I felt a little bit like an imposter, because George would always be reciting things Maharishi had said, and I was always like, feeling very doubtful about him, but loving the meditation. So when I went to India and we were all sitting, the foothills of the Himalayas with Maharishi, and we got special VIP treatment, I always thought Maharishi could tell, if he was so clever and holy and everything, he could probably tell that I wasn't a true believer. But I made it okay within myself, knowing that I loved the meditation. And the longer I meditated in India, longer lengths of time, the more and more I got out of it. So I was never a huge believer in Maharishi himself.
But you did. And
I just have to add to it. And I do meditate. I still meditate, but I don't do TM meditation.
Ah, okay. Did you? You also mentioned that blow up that the Beatles had, that when they suddenly left, when George suddenly packed up because of the accusations against him, that Magic Alex was very much a part of. Did you believe those accusations? And did you also what did you think of Magic Alex too? Because there's been a lot of comments about him through the years about what he meant to the Beatles. But did you think the accusations against the Maharishi were real? Were accurate?
Well, I was really surprised. I was really shocked because I didn't know all this was going on. Mm-hmm. So the morning that George sort of knocked on my door and said, come on, we're all going off to Pattie, and you and me are going to South India, I was saddened, really, because I'd learnt it had become a way of life there. We'd been there for about 2.5 months, meditating and gentleness, and the Himalayas so stunning and beautiful and all this kind of thing. I didn't know, I didn't even think about Maharishi. I just felt really sad that it had come to an end, because by then I didn't really let the Maharishi thing bother me at all. It's like just meditating was just the best, and just being with everybody and our way of life there. So I didn't. I was more shocked than anything. What was your other bit of the question?
Well, I mean, did you also about Magic Alex? Because Magic Alex.
Yeah. I lived with Magic Alex as I rented a room in his house in London for a few months before we went. I can't remember how long it was there. And so he was very sort of sense of possessiveness. So he was good friends with John because he'd made this thing, I think it's called a nothing box. And when John was on LSD, of course, it all seemed really magical to him because lights were flickering. It's just sort of that. From that perspective, no, I didn't think magic at all. And I thought because the day before we went to India, that night before we went to India, John and Cynthia came round just to come and chat and stuff. And I know Alex was still then trying to get John to go to his guru. I didn't even know that he had a guru, but it was still this sense of competing and wanting and possessiveness. So I think when he came, my feeling is that he came to make trouble in some way, to prove that he was right and Maharishi was not the guru that they all thought he was.
There's a couple of other songs that you were instrumental that you were a part of, and one of course is Donovan's Juniper, and you are obviously, I mean, no surprise, very enthusiastic about that. Does that song still have the same effect on you as it did when you originally heard it, or is it even more special now?
I think it's even more. Well, I think the older I've got, as time went on, it was more special, and it was more special in the way it's lovely because I always felt this is my song. Even if I'd hear it as kind of music in a supermarket in LA, or in an elevator or whatever. It felt like it belonged to me. So it's like I'd been given a song. And the other thing is, what it represents when I hear it is all the innocence of the 60s. It really does, and the sort of flower power and the gentleness and,
right.
Fairyland and all that kind of thing. So it's just a little piece of history that was a really sweet time.
Without getting too gossipy, you and Donovan were just friends, correct?
Yeah. There was definitely what I've heard him once call it courtly love, where I know he would have liked it to go a little further, but it didn't. And so we were friends, and there was a love, there was definitely a love, and I actually loved listening to him sing and play guitar. So when we were in India, we'd go down to the Ganges and he'd take his guitar, and it was lovely. So we had a really nice friendship. Another
song that you mentioned in the book, it was George Harrison's song that you call Beggars in a Gold Mine, which in case, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but it's been out on the collector's circuit for many years now. It's called with a different title called Dehradun. Have you?
Oh.
And
right.
Are you aware of that, or
no?
Because
no.
Was Beggars in a Gold Mine the actual title?
I remember when I interviewed George back in must have been like 91 or something, before my book came out. I think my book came out in 92. But yeah, around about 1991, he was in LA, and that's when he first started the Traveling Wilburys. And he came round to my place, and we did the interview for my book, which was then called Musicians in Tune. And in that interview, he talks about this song that he did, and he said it never got recorded on the album. And it was about, he couldn't understand why people had gone all that way for meditation, and yet they'd go off to the Taj Mahal or go shopping for eggs in Dehradun. And so it was then he told me about that. Another
song that you were part of that I wasn't aware of was Jewel-Eyed Judy, the Fleetwood Mac song, and I really love that album. That Kilnhouse album was one of my favorites. I always loved Danny Kerwin's stuff, and it was so sad. I was so sorry to hear that he was having problems, and I was sorry to hear that he passed. But talk about July. Tell me about
Judy.
Yeah, talk about Jewel-Eyed Judy.
we were all staying at Kiln House,
Mm-hmm.
and it was Mick's idea. Mick is always the kind of instigator just to keep the band going, because Peter had left, and because we were all living in apartments in London, he wanted to make sure that this band stayed together. So he was very strategic, and we rented this house, which was an old oast house, where they'd make beer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was pregnant. I was probably about 4 or 5 months pregnant, and they were rehearsing. They were rehearsing in this great big room, and Danny was always stuck for words. And so one day I was just sitting on my bed with my big tummy, and Chris came up to me and said, "Why don't we?" Because she knew I wrote poems, and so she said, "Why don't we see if we can write a song? We need to come up with a song." So Judy Wong was one of our very, very, very good friends,
Mm-hmm.
and so I can't remember whether it was her or me that started off with July Judy, and then we put the words together. Then she did the melody.
Okay.
But,
So Judy.
But they always put it under Mick's name, because their manager was, very, I don't know, he was really not very generous in that way towards women, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
So I never had my name on that, same as I didn't have my name on that other poem that Danny sang, which was one of my poems called Purple Dancer. And that went on the B-side of one of the Fleetwood Mac singles.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
When you talk about Chris, obviously you're talking about Christine McVie, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Another interesting part of the book, you were with Cynthia the day she walked in on John and Yoko.
My goodness. Yes, that was because what happened that Donovan had asked me when we got back from India, would I like to go to Greece with him?
Mm-hmm.
And so Alex said that he wanted to go along too. And then Cynthia, knowing that this plan was afoot, said to me before we got back to England that she would really like to go with us. And so, I know she knew things weren't, because she and I would have chats together as we'd walk along in the ashram. And, I knew she was upset with John that things weren't going very well. And she just wanted to kind of get away. And so we all were in Greece together. And I've got a photograph in the book of us all there. And then when we got back, Alex and I took her back and opened the door. And there was John and there was Yoko. And poor Cynthia, she sort of went into the kitchen, and there was like a chaise longue in the kitchen, and John was just lying there. I can't remember what happened to Yoko. She must have left then.
Mm-hmm.
And John was, like a naughty little boy who'd been caught out, but didn't really mind. So that was it. So Cynthia came to stay with me, then she went to go and stay with other people, and, she was really just bereft.
Uh-huh. Did you have contact with Yoko after that day, or?
I came across John and Yoko in those days, I'm not sure what it was. It was some electronic thing. Maybe it was set up by Magic Alex
Mm-hmm.
or whatever. And they both just said hello, both hand in hand. And I'd come across her, and of course she came to when we went to George's memorial service at Friar Park, where he lived.
Right.
Yoko was there, so you just say hello,
Okay.
But it was never somebody that I got to know or chatty or anything
Okay.
with.
Somebody else you mentioned a lot in the book is Ravi Shankar.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very positive person. You talk about that in the book. Were you a big fan of his music? Did you like his music?
I loved his music. I loved him. And Ali Akbar Khan was another one. And I would listen to them a lot when I was in San Francisco, and then when I came back. And so it was lovely to actually meet him when we came back from India. But I'm wondering if I might have met him a little bit before, because I remember he did, in somebody's house in Chelsea, he did a performance. And it was literally just for their friends. And I went, and Mick and I went. And then I remember Pattie and George were there, and a few other people. So I think I'd met him for the first time there, and then met him again when we came to see him in South India.
Mm-hmm.
We landed in Madras. And I thought he was wonderful. And his whole troupe. There was something about him that was so positive, always laughing, but then also having a serious side to him. I was hugely in awe of him. Thought he was just brilliant.
The junior college I went to had him do a concert. This was in the early 70s. And he played, I think he played like 3 or 4 hours. I mean, he played a long time. I remember he played a long, long time. And by the time it was over, a lot of people had left, but there was no what you would call security, and we were able to go out and talk to him just very briefly. He was, and Ala Raka was with him too.
Oh, and I thought he was lovely.
They both were
so sweet, and of course I saw them at the Monterey Pop Festival.
Oh, you were at that performance.
Yeah.
That performance is amazing because of the way he built it up, and at the end he came to a climax, and it's one of his best performances that I've heard on record. It's really wonderful.
Wonderful. And I seem to remember it was sort of raining a bit up until that point, and then as soon as he got on stage, the rain stopped.
That's
Yeah.
The book ends with you linking up with your father, and that's really, a positive thing. I mean, is that something that Pattie also had to experience too?
No, she never wanted to get in touch with him. She didn't have the desire that I did. So I started quite a few years ago, a few years before I actually met up with him, and writing letters and actually being amazed that he replied, and it was all in secret because we were secrets. And I just kept on going with it. And Pattie kept saying, I don't know why you bother, he's just an empty shell. But I believed that he was more than an empty shell, even though he couldn't remember who I was as a child in Africa, which was hard, and, had kind of come on to me. And that was really weird. And I thought, no, I'm not going to see him anymore. But then I'd have a dream about him and then write to him and say, you have to tell me who you are, or I can't see you anymore. Or I need to know. So that when he started writing and telling me about his life, where he was born, because I didn't know any of this stuff, and what he went through, and then he told me about the accident that he had as a bomber pilot in the Second World War, and how he only just survived, but he survived very severe burns. And I think there was something about once he started writing, and it took him quite a while, a few months just to do 4 double-sided pages. And then I thought, okay, well, he's obviously not going to say when I was born or when we all moved to Africa. But then I left it, and that was fine, and I gave copies to my brothers and my sisters. And then about a year or so later, he called me to say, I can't stop writing. I've written more. And he wanted me to go and see him, and he'd written things, and he'd found pictures and all sorts of these amazing things to do with his accident and his life. And I believe that by asking him to write, it actually made these frozen memories, it actually stored these frozen memories. And he started to then remember me and then connect. But he didn't have that same thing with Pattie or Colin, because they hadn't gone that extra mile trying to see who this person was and really believe there was somebody in there, because it was important to me.
You said he came on to me.
I actually write about it in the book. And I say, when my first meeting with him after all these years, and it was just painful because he didn't talk, and I had to keep trying to talk. And do you remember me? No, I don't. Do you have any photographs? Any of that? And then when I went into the kitchen to start washing up, he then came behind me and put his arms around me from behind and pushed me towards him. Like, horrible, not the sort of thing a father would do. And then I knew I had to stay the night there and in the same room as him, which was horrendous. But you see, I didn't have a voice in those days. I didn't have a voice to say, this is horrible, I'm driving home, because I've never been in this experience before. I've been so excited about to meet my father, who I've been looking for in different guises, for many years. And then when he said goodnight, it was like a kiss on the lips, and then whenever I'd see him at my sister's or anything, he would sort of give me a hug, and then it would be the old grope on the bum sort of thing, but it's bluntly. So it was sort of not cool, and it wasn't good. And then I actually ended up by telling the woman friend he was with, this is what he's doing. And she then said, well, he does that to all my friends, and from now on he will not be doing it again. And he stopped. So once he stopped all that, then he became more into remembering things and able to write to me and connect. And so it was I could have easily just been put off him for the rest of my life and not even bother, let him die, but I didn't, because once he stopped all that bad behavior. And the thing is, he obviously had post-traumatic stress disorder when we were in Africa and after his very bad plane crash. Mm-hmm. And of course it was never treated in those days. And so it came out in different ways, I think. All this bottled up stuff.
Okay. What kind of a relationship do you have with Mick Fleetwood now?
Well, I saw him last night, and he came to my book launch, and that was just lovely. And in London, and very caring, just, so proud of him, because he'd put together this fantastic concert at the London Palladium the night before, which I went to, where he had the main band that he was playing with, and then lots of different guests, well-known musicians, guests, and it was just brilliant.
Is that the thing?
All that together.
Is that the thing for Peter Green?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Did Peter show up and play?
No, I don't know whether Peter was even there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
but it was great, because actually I did bump into backstage. I bumped into Jeremy Spencer, and hadn't seen him for 50 years.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool, and all sorts of different musicians and stuff. It was really, really wonderful. Really, I was really proud of him.
Did John McVie and Christine show up too?
Christine did, but not John. John stayed in LA. Chris sang a couple of songs, and each musician would come along as guests, and they would sing a couple of songs. It was great.
It sounds like it would have been great. You've written this book, and the full title of the book is
Juniper,
mm-hmm.
A Journey Beyond the Muse.
And then the first book
was Musicians in Tune.
Okay.
And that came out in the States and in Japan,
mm-hmm.
and then it didn't come out in England for many years later. Probably came out about 5 years ago,
mm-hmm.
and so I changed the cover, changed the title, did a little bit of editing in it, and so that's it's not only rock and roll.
How's Pattie doing these days? And have you seen her lately?
She has a book that's coming out. It was meant to come out as a photographic book, but it's probably more like a photographic memoir. She's fine. I think, she's been working on finding all her photographs and putting that book together with help. So that's what she's doing. She lives in London, and then she's got a cottage in West Sussex.
I met her when she came out to San Francisco with the George Harrison photo exhibit. What did happen during that engagement was she announced she was engaged. She was getting married again.
Right. To Rod.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. In fact, he was there. She was. We talked. We did an interview, and it was a very nice interview. It was funny that we talked about the last waltz, because I didn't even know she was there, and she talked about being there, and I told her that they had torn Winterland down, which was where the last waltz was, and she wasn't. Were you there too?
Yeah, I went to Winterland when I lived there in '67.
Did you? Did you go to the last waltz?
No.
Oh, but you went to Winterland a bunch of other times.
Winterland, yeah.
Oh, we did too. We
Fillmore West, obviously.
We did too. Yeah, I did too. We saw many shows at Winterland. Yeah. I only saw one at Fillmore, and actually it was Fleetwood Mac. It was I think it was the last time they played with Jeremy Spencer, because I believe it was on after they left San Francisco. they went to Fresno and then to L.A., and it was in L.A., according to your book, that he left. But he did, I remember, because that was, believe it or not, that was the first, I think that was one of the first concerts I ever went to, especially one of the first late night shows, because I was young then. And I remember Jeremy came out in the gold lame jacket and did the Elvis medley. Yep.
Yeah.
I don't remember if Christine was part of the group, but I do remember the rest of the group. And do you know who was on that bill? A group called Clover with Huey Lewis. Do you know Huey Lewis and the News?
Yeah, Huey Lewis. Yeah.
Huey Lewis was part of, and also Tom Rush, I think, was the other act on the. But that was I'll never forget seeing Jeremy. I think Jeremy came out. I think it was about 2:00 in the morning, with the gold lame jacket, and it was amazing. Because I remember reading about it, and we were wondering if he was going to do it, and he did. And then to hear after he left, or to hear a few days later that he had left the group was really a surprise. I'm glad he's back. I guess back together, or I know I actually have one of his later albums, and I'm glad he's performing, that kind of stuff again, because he was great in those.
Yeah, he's great, and he did a great couple of numbers at the Peter Green celebration. And he's just, he's still just a great slide guitarist, and he's still got the chops, and it was really fun.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyway, Jenny, that's about all I have to say. But thank you for doing this. This has been it's been great to talk to you. And best of luck with the book. It's available on Amazon and everywhere people can get it. And it'll be at the fest. You'll be selling them at the fest, which fortunately I'm not going to be at. But best of luck there, and take care, and thanks again.
Well, thank you so much, and I really enjoyed this.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Jenny. You take care.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye then. Bye.
What do you think of them coming in and then screaming?
Well, they paid the money, so they can scream, can't they? I mean, if they hadn't paid and they were screaming, it'd be a liberty, wouldn't it?
We sort of pick up a newspaper and read about the Beatles, and I just read about them, as though I'm not one of them, sort of thing. I just read, the Beatles are doing good.
We never think of it as a phenomenon or any phenomenon. Add a few, you see. We just keep going. To me, it's just like in the old days when we were playing for sort of a couple of dollars a night, just because we get more money, we still play the same.
Yeah, well, we're still basically the same. It's just that we can afford things, but now, as we got the money, there's not as many things that we can think of that we want to buy. I could think of hundreds of things when I didn't have any money, but now, I don't.
Thank you to Journey Boyd for that interview. You can find us on Facebook in our Beatles News and Information group, and you can also check out our That's What I Want Beatles store page. If you haven't joined our Beatles News and Information group, please do. We post all the information about our shows and other things too. You can find our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, and wherever podcasts are available, and we're also on YouTube. Thanks again for listening. Tell your friends. Please subscribe if you don't subscribe already. That's it for today. Until next time, this is Steve Marinucci saying,
Be seeing you.
Keep that one. Mark it fab.
What a show! What a show! Oh, wonderful!